Thoughts on the readings for May 9th: Deuteronomy 26, Song of Solomon 6, Acts 21, 22. Deuteronomy 26 contains the offering of the firstfruits and the tithes. The firstfruits of the land are always Yahweh's, and they needed to be humbly and thankfully presented to the priest with an acknowledgement of Israel's great debt for the Almighty delivering them. Speaking of Jacob's, i.e. Israel, history, they were to recite the words of verse 3. Following the priest's response, they were then to answer with the words of verses 5 to the first half of verse 10. Slowly read those verses and reflect how feeble and insignificant we are, and yet how great is our sovereign's redeeming hand that has been outstretched for us. Verses 11 to 12 tells us that they were to give their tithes joyfully and acknowledging God's gracious provision to the Levite, the widow, and the fatherless. Then they were to recite the words of verses 23 to 15 in thankfulness to their Creator for the privilege that He has provided in His evident care and compassion for all classes within His nation. The last words of their invocation are a prayer for divine acceptance. Do we give help from a bountiful and generous heart? Verses 16 to 19 declares that this spirit of obedience is essential, and when it is shown will become a preserving blessing for each individual and for the entire nation. In Song of Solomon 6 verse 1 we hear of the bride's companions offering to go with her to seek for the groom. The bride's response is recorded in verses 2 to 3. Here she says that he has probably gone to his spice garden and that she expects to find her beloved among the lilies. The bride proclaims her intense love for her husband. In verses 3 to 11 we have the bridegroom's declaration of love for his perfect and magnificent spouse. In a succession of grand metaphors the bride is described. Her presence is awesome and takes his breath away. Her eyes are striking and have captivated her groom. The hair of the bride is thick and shimmering. Her teeth are perfectly formed and matching from top to bottom. The bride's cheeks flush with a healthy rosy glow. When Solomon compares this loved one, her beauty excels that of 60 his queens, 80 of his concubines, and unnumbered virgins from his realm. In her and in her alone does King Solomon find perfection. The groom's metaphors conclude in verse 4 in the same way that they commenced. His bride is in every way formidable and a worthy companion of her king. Verses 11 to 12 tell of the bride's response. She sees herself with her incomparable husband transported into a location of many great delights to her senses. She sees herself in Solomon's chariot, and her powerful prince the master of every situation. In verse 13 the companions of the bride ask her to come back to them as they are missing her peaceful and calming presence. The song concludes with the groom's endorsement of the pacific qualities of the bride and find those qualities a match with his, i.e. Solomon's, own character. Acts 21 records Paul's journey to Jerusalem. The apostle comforts and encourages many groups of disciples as he heads to Jerusalem. An old prophet, named Agabus, attempts to persuade Paul to go no further. Paul will not, like his Lord, be dissuaded from going. The first thing Paul does on his arrival is to see James, who advises him of the best course of action to be taken so as to avoid trouble. The apostle is advised to complete his Nazarite vow and to cover the expenses of 4 other brothers who are completing their vows. James reiterates to Paul that the only binding requirements on Gentile believers are the keeping of the 4 matters agreed upon at the Jerusalem conference. However, Paul cannot peacefully complete his vows since he is arrested in the temple by Asian Jews. These hostile Jews mistakenly believe that Paul has profaned the temple by bringing Trophimus, a Gentile Ephesian, into the temple. A tribune from the Roman fort of Antonia rescues Paul and commands that he be chained. The crowd clamors for the apostle's blood, just as they had for his Lord some 3.5 decades earlier. In the barracks Paul speaks with the tribune, dismissing many of the fanciful thoughts as to who Paul might be. Paul asks for permission to address the crowd from the steps of the fort, and his speech is recorded in chapter 22. Paul gives his defense in Hebrew, and initially the crowd pays close attention. The aged apostle describes his own education in the Pharisaic tradition under Gamaliel and his zeal for the law. After this he tells of his experiences on the Damascus road, his conversion to a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ. Paul says that he is warned by Jesus his Lord to immediately leave Jerusalem since his testimony will not be accepted. The Jews attentively listen until Paul speaks of being sent to the Gentiles. Once again uproar follows, and the tribune commands that Paul be scourged, that the tribune might understand why the multitude were so angry with the apostle. Paul, on this occasion, uses his Roman citizenship to avoid a pointless flogging. The chapter concludes with the tribune intending to have Paul examined by the Jewish Sanhedrin on the next day.